For members of the public joining us online, the meeting will begin shortly. We are waiting for one of our committee members. Thank you.
I love the traffic coming. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Welcome. Let's call the Administration Budget Committee, the Open Space Authority to order at 5:36. Gonna call roll?
Director Chapman,
Yes, I'm here.
Director Alexander, not present. Director Gill.
I'm here.
Okay. So let's see, this portion of the meeting is reserved for persons desiring to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any speakers on Zoom?
Any of the guests joining us via Zoom, if you would like to comment on any item not on the agenda, please raise your hand. You can do so by dialing *6. There are none.
Okay. Right, I see none here. So then we will move on to the approval of minutes.
I move to approve. What do I say?
Yeah, okay.
You can do second.
And I will second the approval of minutes. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Director Chapman,
Yes,
Director Gill.
Yes.
okay, the approval of minutes is complete. All right, now we will review the proposed budget for fiscal year 2024-2025.
Which one is this one? That one here. You stand for even B. Good evening, directors. Justina Teen, Fiscal Services Officer. And we're pleased to provide the Admin Budget Committee with a draft of the proposed budget for fiscal year 2024-2025. But before we dive into the numbers, we wanted to share with the committee staff's approach to the budget this fiscal year. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lee Rauscher, Assistant General Manager, to kind of take over.
It's Justina. Since there are several of us presenting this evening, we figured we would remain seated, have Justina run the PowerPoint up there rather than doing a dance for you every couple of moments. So good evening, directors. I am Lee Rauscher, Assistant General Manager, and I'm happy to join Justina, Elizabeth, Megan Drager this evening to present the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget as a preview before we bring it to the board on June 13th.
Yes.
Sorry, I've had May and June confused all day, so June 13th is correct. And to just kind of lay out what we're going to go through this evening. So starting off with, the authority has always prioritized being a fiscally responsible agency and to continually improve our work. In planning for fiscal year 24-25, we can see that some economic indicators are improving, yet there are some indications that like reductions in outside funding streams that suggest it's going to be quite prudent to be fiscally conservative in this next year or more. Since the authority's beginning 30 years ago, the agency has conserved approximately 30,000 acres of natural and working lands for the benefit of current and future generations. Our preserve system has grown to 33 miles of public trails and 4 preserves that are open to the public 365 days a year. The newest one being the 1,831 acre Mayan Oyakma preserve with significant biodiversity, including rare plants, a resident herd of Tule elk, and the federally endangered bay checker spot butterfly. And if I must say so myself, some of the most outstanding wildflower displays in the valley. However, while our conservation reach and impact continues to increase, our revenues have remained flat, and with the passage of Measure Q in 2014, which was extended without increase by Measure T in 2020, the agency brings in $24 per parcel and another $12 per parcel through District 1 for a total of approximately $12 million a year. Even though we do an excellent job of leveraging outside funding, which you'll hear more about from Megan in a little bit.
Let me ask a quick question.
Sure.
So before that, we had $12 per parcel, right?
From District 1.
And then now we have $24, right?
And we have both. So we have 2 funding sources, Measure T and District 1.
I understand that, but,
Okay.
but it means we are taking 12 plus 24,
Yes,
that's a $36, right?
it is. Yeah. So even though we do an excellent job leveraging outside funding to continue advancing conservation at the pace and scale that we have been, you can see from this slide that at some point the agency will need to look at additional funding. So as is our practice of continuous improvement, staff developed and implemented 2 new tools this budget cycle to help us plan our work and improve our forecasting abilities. And I'm going to turn it over to Megan to talk about the first one.
Good evening, directors. The first tool that we want to mention is a 3-year CIP or capital improvement plan. Capital projects are one of the biggest investments that the agency makes. This includes acquisitions, restoration, and public access projects. These are generational investments that the authority is making, and it takes forethought and planning. So this year we created our first formal capital improvement plan, or CIP, to map out our projects over the coming years. We started with a 3-year CIP focusing on our current projects through their life cycle. This exercise helps us plan for future expenditures of OFA funds, but also very importantly, shows us where funds are needed in the future so that we have time to secure grants and other outside funding for those projects.
That 3 years we have on our strategic planning, 3-year strategic planning, or how we can just do the budgeting. So then we have something visioning there, we need that much money, or we need the capital to be within 3 years. So how it works? Can you just explain a little bit?
Yeah, so this is just the capital project, so it's not everything that the authority is doing, but the big things, which acquisitions, big restoration projects, public access, things like Maya Yakima just opening, you know, that was, would have been on there before. And if planning out, most of these projects take several years, if not many years, to buy the land, make the improvements and open to the public. And so this is helping us plan those expenditures out over the course of years. Partly because of, you know, financial constraints, but partly because of delays, or not delays, but just the way a natural project progresses. It can take a while to get through permitting and other milestones. So it lets us see which year the real construction, which tends to be the most expensive part of a capital project, what year that's gonna happen.
But you already make the roadmap there, right? So 3 years roadmap, you already have that, we want to buy this one, and this year might be up to this milestone, we can do that. That's the way it works, or how? I want to be just understand a little bit.
Yeah, of course. They're great questions. And so what we've done is take our current projects. So there's a current capital projects, some of which are already in process, some are just starting new, as well as the acquisitions that we know we're working on, like the Coyote Valley acquisitions from Post. Things like that, putting them in there and then figuring out how much would be spent in each of those 3 years for those particular projects. But the idea is that this, you know, we're working out this new system, but that this would be revisited annually. So to your point, then that could change as a project moves through, then other funding is available, so we can add in new projects. It's balancing both finances, but also staff capacity. You know, we can only do so many projects at a time, so it lets us see where we're going.
So you are going to look at the back history also, so like, so how we can, your back history mean is then what we did in the past, and then just look at the trend in that way, you guys are just visioning that 3 years or 9 years, forecasting?
For the 3-year CIP anyway, the history isn't directly in there, but it certainly informs the way we paced the projects, knowing how the staffing capacity or permitting timelines, things like that take. So it's part of what went into it, but it's not directly listing the past projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another new tool that we use this year is the 9-year forecast of the agency's finances. So we use this tool to look at a high level of major expense categories such as salaries and benefits, non-discretionary operating expenses, discretionary operating expenses, capital projects from our 3-year C project plan, and non-capital projects. Not all projects are capital in nature. Election expenses, our urban grant program allocation. This allowed staff and financial consultants that we engage to evaluate different spending scenarios and see the long-term impacts on the pace of our major project work and carryover balances. So bringing the 3-year CIP and the 9-year forecast tools together further helped us evaluate and prioritize our projects and other expenses.
So you are using any kind of software for that?
No.
So how you guys can monitor that?
We are currently, because these are new tools that we've designed using Excel spreadsheets. And I know, and one of the new projects for the upcoming year will be looking into possibilities of not specifically a budgeting software, but perhaps a larger enterprise system that would also include equivalents for these tools. But to get us started and to get us thinking, we built our own models. Yeah,
Why 9 years? It's like an odd number, so, you know.
yeah, I think
Five.
when we first started, we were kind of at 10, and by the time we kind of rounded things out, we were at 9. It is an odd number. There was no rhyme or reason for 9 versus 8 or 11.
No lucky number.
No lucky number, right?
Thank you.
These models also helped our financial consultants consider additional funding opportunities, mechanisms, the amount of revenue we might need in the future, and the timing of such mechanisms. And the important part is the amount that would support our ambitious visions for the future. So going forward, we'll be evaluating our forecasting projections and assumptions a couple of times a year and may re-engage the financial consultants as needed for additional insights into potential for future spending and funding mechanisms. Thanks, Justina. So you may be wondering how staff managed to, oh, maybe I skipped a page here. I didn't. Oh, I apologize. I missed a very important part back in the beginning, and that was to tell you that we're bringing a budget this evening of $18,776,000 this evening, and it's significantly smaller than the previous 2 years. It's an 18% reduction from the current fiscal year that we're just about to conclude, and it is 24% smaller than the prior fiscal year. So to explain a little bit about how we managed to come in with a much smaller budget, I want to give you a high-level overview of what we did, and we'll be getting into more detail with all the numbers shortly. At the general manager's direction, we looked at different categories of expenses. And starting with staffing, which Elizabeth will explain more in a moment, we looked at not adding any new positions to the roster in the upcoming year. We decided that we would fill only selected positions that are currently vacant. So we have 3 positions that we are not listing to be filled in the upcoming year.
What is the reason for that? Why we are not hiring more people? Because we
Right.
don't have the business? Or we don't want to expand the agency more, or what? There are something is, so whenever you are not adding more people, not hiring, so then it means we are not acquiring any more land or what?
It means that we really want to be fiscally conservative, and we are focusing on the most important projects and tasks over the next year. We're asking staff to do a little bit more and pausing on filling all the available positions. We're still hiring several folks, and again, I think Elizabeth will go a little bit into that, but we will pause on these 3 positions in particular.
Is this to be strategic, so you avoid layoffs?
This is strategic so that we're just using our money in the best way possible. As you're probably aware, other agencies have done layoffs.
Yes.
You'll hear a little bit about how some of the funding streams that we're accustomed to being able to tap are running a little dry or slow. And we are taking preventative measures to make sure that we are in good fiscal standing, and with any luck at all, several months from now or a year from now, we'll be, filling those
I think
positions.
that's a very smart move. I mean, I think it's better to plan for that than
Yeah.
to staff up and then have to come back and say,
Yeah,
now we have to reduce positions, because it's never a very comfortable thing to do.
absolutely, absolutely. And then, as you know, when we had several promotions a few months ago, and we decided not to backfill behind any of those vacant positions.
So you guys are eliminating those positions or just put on hold?
Put them on hold for now. Yeah. This also gives an opportunity for the new groups and folks in new roles to figure out how those things work and what they bring to the table, and figure out what gaps, if any, we have after that. So secondly, we looked at our projects and operating expenses. After our first draft of the budget, we asked staff to go back to the drawing board, again, at the general manager's direction, and we were able to cut approximately $1 million from our requests. Getting lean, concentrating on the most important things, postponing things that can wait, reducing maybe in scale, some of our projects, banking only on committed outside funding and not speculating on funds that may come in. And that brings us to the place to talk about outside funding. So I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
Great, yes, outside funding is definitely an important part of
Sorry.
Slides are going crazy. Definitely an important part of our ability to cut costs. We have historically been very successful in bringing in outside funds, grants, and other sources, partner funding, and so on. We generally have about a 1-to-3 ratio. With $1 of OSA funds, we're able to leverage and bring in $3 of outside funds. For big acquisitions, it's actually higher. It can be as much as 1-to-4. So every OSA dollar brings in 4 outside dollars for that group of projects. And this is a really important source of funding for our work. As Lee noted, we'll be mentioning this tonight throughout the presentation, and that everything we're talking about tonight, when we're talking about grants, these are grants that have been secured. We are under a grant agreement. We are formally approved to go ahead and spend the funds. So this is not the speculative grants that might come in the future. A couple of things to note about grants related to budget. One is that these are on a reimbursement basis. So that means the OSA, we need to front the money and pay for the initial costs, and then later we're reimbursed by the funder. And that generally works well, but of course the reimbursement sometimes is many months, sometimes a different fiscal year from when we spend the money. So grants and finance are always in touch to make sure that we don't have cash flow issues. And similarly, most grants require local matching funds. So we always do need to make sure that we have enough of our own funds to put into projects to meet those local match requirements so that we can be successful in bringing in outside funding.
All right, so as I mentioned, the budget that we're presenting this evening is $18,776,984. I don't know why we couldn't find $16 more to spend it on, just so we could round it up a little bit, but we didn't. And again, you can see the downward trend, which we think is the
I
smart.
like it.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Yeah.
But we think this is the right place to be, given the economic times and who knows what the future will bring come November with the national election, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of factors at play right now. So in a moment, Justina's going to set the stage for the proposed budget by walking the committee through the projected ending fund balances at the end of this current fiscal year. She'll get you grounded in those numbers. She's going to walk you through our revenue and income amounts and sources. She'll give you a summary of our major expense categories, the balance of funds committed to our urban grant program. And then she's going to do a 3-year comparison for you so that you can see the differences. And then Megan will pretty much wrap us up with talking a little bit more about how we maximize that outside funding, how we really make every effort to leverage outside funding and the impact it's going to have on our bottom line. So just wait, it gets better. Stay tuned for the end of the presentation. We're happy to take questions as we go or at the end. Before I turn it back to Justina.
I like to be as you go.
I thought so. I thought you might.
No, and I'm gonna echo Director Gill, because I think what you're doing is very solid, that you are anticipating the funds are coming in, so you're building a budget that's responsible, that's fiscally transparent, which I think, other agencies could learn by you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, did you want to comment?
No, actually, if you look at the trend, 24, 22, 18, right? So I'm just curious, what kind of just cut you did that? Major cut? Just when you bring that 18 from 24 to 18. So could you explain a little bit what do you just cut that one, then it's bring to 18?
I believe Justina, you'll have
Justina,
some
can
slides
you-
that will.
Okay, I'll wait there.
Yeah, there you go.
So if I may, I wanted to add a comment too here. I mean, part of the reasoning, of course, for being fiscally conservative right now, as you mentioned, Director Chapman, not wanting to set us up for potential layoffs or anything like that. But also, as you know, we're considering a future funding measure at some point, but that's still being explored. And so we have no idea when that might come to fruition. So we don't want to build in a budget that depends on future funding that we're not certain of. So.
No, but you're also willing to look in-house, and you're willing to do what you need to do in order to streamline the budget process, so that when you do go to look outside funds, you can go back to the public and say, we've done some internal funds and we've looked at what we need to do. we're being transparent. Now we've reached to the point where we really do need additional help. And so, we get it
That's right.
first, right?
Right,
Yeah.
we're being very responsible with your money.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I think
exactly.
that is very, very important.
And should we receive additional funding? We have this wonderful new tool, right? Courtesy of Megan and others that we can now tap to put to good use, so.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, so now I'm the numbers girl or lady at this age. But so let's begin with kind of estimating what we'll have by the end of this current fiscal year. So that will be June 30th, 2024. And basically consider this as kind of like our savings. We manage and track 5 governmental funds. You see 4 on the slides. The 5th one being the grants. And so it's District 1, Measure Q, Measure T, Reserve, and the grants. Each year, we receive approximately 4.2 million from District 1 and 8 million from Measure T. Any unspent revenues from previous fiscal year accumulate in a balance that we call it carryover balance. That's that second. So, the words in purple, those are our funds. Those are the carryover balance. Yes.
District 1, Q and T. I understand Q and T because we just had 2 times we did that. District 1 is how much, I mean, per parcel we have.
It's $12 per parcel
And then,
and equates to about 4.2 million a
okay,
year.
how about Q?
Q, so what happens was in 2020, Measure T replaced Measure Q. Measure Q was 24, bringing 8. It no longer brings in any new revenues
That's the question. Then why we don't merge together? Q and T.
because they are separate, distinct funds.
It's not coming anymore then.
Correct,
Q
but
is
they're
almost- how much money we left on this, I mean, the Measure Q now?
6.977 million. That carryover balance that you see there.
Then on one point, that will be eliminated.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we would draw down from it. So what happens is every year when we have unspent revenues, it kind of accumulates into that carryover. But not 100% of that carryover is available for future fiscal years to use. Because we do have commitments where we set aside either through board approved policies or resolutions to be used for specific purposes.
But the question is there, so when we have our expense, right?
Mhm.
So instead of using the expense from the other 2, we can use the expense on Measure Q. Then in that way, so you have actually less paperwork. Because you have to be just use on one bucket.
So
Instead of just dividing into all 3, but I look at this one, so your expenses are looking that you just use some from District 1, some district, I mean the Q and then T. Why is not just only majority of them is use 1?
sure, that's a great question. Now, each fund is governed? No. Like the usage of the money is dictated by the expenditure plan that was approved by the voters. So there are certain eligible projects and eligible expenses that only Measure Q can pay for, only what Measure T can pay for, as well as what District 1 can pay for. And then obviously the grants is whatever the grantor would dictate.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay.
Mhm.
If they
So-
already have the policies and procedure to
Yes.
use that one, then we cannot just
Yeah.
do anything.
So we can't commingle funds. So they're very distinct. And that's why we manage, and we are audited by each individual funds to make sure that the expenditures are eligible.
That
And
is more work, right? So when you handle 3 different bucket, then has to be work more than just use only one bucket. right?
yeah,
Anyway, that's fine.
It might be worth adding an asterisk to the slide, just so that was very helpful.
Mhm.
It's always in it, yes, but obviously, because these are voter approved measures, they're gonna have their own set of
Yep.
rules that go along with it, yes.
understood. And so within the carryover, so for example, I'll take District 1. we estimate that by the end of the fiscal year, we'll have a carryover balance of about 9.2 million. However, there is money that we have to set aside. It's about approximately 2 million. That's part of the 20% funding program. And again, that is governed by the 5-year plan where it has where we set money aside. And so what's really available for the agency to use for future fiscal years to pay for expenses and projects
We
would
can
be,
take the loan that one or no?
I'm sorry,
20% we can take loan? Agency can take the loan or no?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I'm just
What's in
saying,
the ballot?
with that, we can take
It's
loan and
effective
go back.
ballot measure that.
Well, I understand.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's the money is sitting there, right? So if we need that, we can use it and then we return back later on, no? No, not worth it. Yes.
So for the agency's use, the actual amount that's available would be just 7.2 million. So as we kind of move through each fund measure Q, there is a project that we had set aside through a resolution that the board had approved. And then in terms of measure T, there are currently no commitments made against. That's purely for our carryover to use for our projects and expenditures.
So then I have a quick question on maybe P.
Mm-hmm.
So then we don't have 20% on maybe P?
No,
So only District 1 has,
yes.
You have to go back and remember your ballot measures.
yeah. Just want to make sure.
And perhaps that could be a topic for ABC on another time. A refresher.
Refresher, right?
Yeah.
Because they were all different.
Mhm.
Were done for different things and had different specifics, and over time, we're gonna forget all those.
So it means
Material.
whatever we are taking $12, so that is has only 20% of.
For, yes, the district one, yes.
Whatever we have Q and then P, we don't have that, right?
No.
That's good. We save a lot of money.
We do have the urban grant program under that one. That,
That is a separate. So million or what, 1.5 million yearly or?
I will go over the, I have the balances
Okay,
at
anyway,
later
We
slides.
have less time, just.
Sure.
finish that.
Sure. In the reserve, we have the reserve fund policy. It's a board policy. There's a little under 15.9 million. The board had set aside 14 million for as what we dubbed as operational reserve. It's back then it was about approximately calculated as 2 years of kind of like a rainy day fund that we could tap into for operational operating expenses. And then through our agricultural easements as well as recommendations through the LTA Land Trust Alliance, we have money set aside for conservation stewardship of easements, and that amount right now is at $300,000. So that is also money that we can't tap unless it's for conservation stewardship of those easements. And so what is actually available for the agency's use from the reserve carryover is a little over 1.5 million.
Question, and where do you build in revenue for leases and things like that?
So for the leases, it depends. The agricultural leases at Powell River, those are billed to Measure T because the agreement or the intent of the leases is to offset the maintenance of the land. So then it kind of offsets where the the revenue comes in, and then we also have expenses, the wells, fences, etc. And then grazing leases are currently under District 1, as they historically have been through District 1. And then we also have mitigation income that also funnels through District 1 because the expenses come out from District 1. Yeah. Any additional questions before we move on about what we project to have in our accounts? Okay. So with that, so that's what we estimate that we'll have. Now, what would we receive what we estimate to receive in the next fiscal year, as well as what we plan to spend. During the fiscal year 24-25, this is the breakdown of the estimated revenue and income that we anticipate receiving. In my world, how I we termed it, the revenues consist of contractual, secured for sure inflows of monetary sources. So that's District 1, Measure T. Then we're under contract with other agencies to be reimbursed when we perform land management services. And that would be the land management revenue line. And then finally, we have the ag lease agreements, where we know the annual amount per the lease agreement. So the subtotal revenue is about a little under 13 million. And then we have carryover, which we discussed in the previous slide. It's the accumulation of the unspent revenues from previous fiscal years. And in this upcoming proposed budget, we recommend withdrawing some funds from carryover to use to move forward some capital projects, some acquisitions, and some natural resource restoration projects. And then finally, we have kind of like the other income sources, which are grants that we've secured and anticipate to seek reimbursement for the work that we'll deliver in the upcoming fiscal year. There's also interest, estimated interest income, and finally the grazing lease income, which is budgeted based on historical trends, but is subject to fluctuations due to the grazing capacities of the grazer, because it is calculated quarterly with the grazers, depending on how much cattle they have on the land. And then, so we anticipate using a little bit more than 4.6 million in carryover, mostly from Measure Q, to fund our capital improvement projects and acquisition. And Measure T continues to fund our preserve maintenance and operations and restoration projects and the master planning for North County Valley conservation areas. And then, unfortunately, since operating expenses kind of continue to increase year over year while our benefit assessments kind of remain level, we do find ourselves needing to use some carryover from District 1 to kind of continue funding our operating expenses.
So this slide is, we have $19 million
Not,
revenue.
so not necessarily, the revenue is more closer to the
No, no, no,
12.9.
Total, we have the money,
Yes,
agency, total money in our bank or whatever, so have only 19 million left, right?
so no,
I
19 is not
have
what's in the
here.
bank. 19 is not what's in the bank. More of the previous slide is more of what's closer to what's in the bank, the carryover balances. The 9.2 in District 1, the 6.9 in Measure Q, the 6.7.
15 point, okay.
So that's what's in the bank. Consider this is the revenue is kind of like our paycheck. And then the carryover is the paycheck's not quite enough to sustain what we anticipate spending next year. So we actually have to withdraw from our carryover, which is like our savings.
That's
So-
my question is that how much money the agency has at this point? So
16.
like this is the bucket and
Mhm.
then for all the money is there. All the years, the 30 years, how much money right now we have? Do you have that kind of
Like-
number?
High level, 38 million.
Included whatever we had the last time when we had a lawsuit and then we saved some money, everything included, right?
Yes.
That is a 32 or 33 million on that time. So we can save that after we pay to the taxpayer money, then we have that, right?
So that amount actually is sitting in our reserve. Now, that 32 was eons ago. The current balance is the 15.89 million.
Total left.
In
reserve.
it, yes.
Okay. I want to, I'm thinking that then, no, so what is the agency's position at this point? So when we are running that business, so we have to be know that agency in a strong position, or we need to do something, or may need to put on the ballot one more time instead of running straight agency. Healthy business, it's business anyway, healthy business we are running or
Yeah.
we. So one thing you, I like that one, we just reduce the expense, then we have to increase the revenue as well to run the healthy business. That's my concern is that then how much money we have and then do we just saving something or we are just hand to mouth?
So our revenues have not increased. It's a flat parcel tax.
And
Yeah. Mhm.
so how many years we can run it?
I think you're seeing the trajectory. of
I
that.
understand how many years we have the fund to run exactly whatever the situation right now. Do you have any idea?
That was a 9-year forecast that we were trying to kind of project if we were trying to run with current expenditures, the CI, if we commit to some capital improvement projects with our balances, when would we would know when we would kind of run dry. We did
Sure.
project that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to think about that.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So that was the revenue part. Next is the breakdown of the proposed budget by major expense categories. Payroll is basically our staff salaries. Benefits include our health benefits, which is medical, dental, vision, includes employer taxes, CalPERS contributions. Travel and expenses include mileage reimbursements, as well as allowance for typical business-related travel. Supplies and consumables, it includes supplies for the office as well as out in the field. Postage and printing, safety supplies, uniforms. Those are some examples of what type of expenses go into that category. Outside services, one of our bigger categories, as you can see for the budget. It consists of several subcategories. There are non-discretionary expenses, for example, related to accounting, finance, like auditors, our engineering services for our District 1 assessment. We also have our fees for our investment advisor, legal counsel is included. Then we have IT services related expenses, communications related content and design services. And then there's also resource management services like site monitoring, habitat restoration expenses, a lot of planning services like CEQA, engineering, design, long-term planning, long-range planning, and then finally any kind of related acquisition and capital improvement expenses, such as surveys, inspections. Also, just then construction itself would fall into this category. Other services and expenses, that's a category where we kind of collect a lot of the business insurance expenses for the agency, fees, bank fees, escrow fees, permit fees, public notices, wire fees. Those are all put in under that bucket. And then our environmental education and volunteer program expenses also fall into this category, and as well as recruitment costs. Equipment and maintenance category. Those expenses include shop and field equipment, computer and software, as well as vehicle and fleet maintenance expenses. And then facilities and utilities. Those include janitorial, landscaping, alarm services, and utilities like internet, water, gas, garbage, sewer. And then memberships and sponsorships. Those expenses include memberships such as being part of a CSDA, California Special Districts Association as an agency, or just professional memberships, like for example, I myself, continued education and just staying up to date with GASB rules, being a member of the GFOA, Governmental Finance Officers Association. So certain staff members, they would have professional memberships, such as our planning, design and construction manager having an architecture license. So fees such as that. And then the grant program, that line includes the allocation amount for the that includes for the 20% funding program and the urban grant program. And I'll go in more details about allocation and the balance, et cetera. But that is our proposed budget. Again, it's that shy of this $16 amount that Lee mentioned.
Is it payroll? And then your outside service payroll and benefits. Oh, so those, like whatever the 6.7 millions, that is, whatever the vacancies it's not filled, that is included, or that's not included? Because we have many open seats, right?
Mhm.
I mean, not open seats, open jobs, we are not going to fill that, right? But we already budgeted that, or that is included or no?
So for this current year, it is budgeted, but we're proposing for next fiscal year, we did not
Okay,
include it
that's
because
why-
we are
that's why
intentionally
it's
not.
Lower than the last year, right?
Yeah, correct, yes, because we're intentionally not filling it, therefore we're not budgeting for it.
Makes sense, thank you.
Okay, so at this point, before we go any more questions, I just want to make sure check in and see if there's any public comment on Zoom.
We do, we have one hand raised, caller 8150, if you would like to speak right now.
Yes, good afternoon, committee members and staff. This is Doug Muirhead, Morgan Hill resident. Congratulations on your 3 new tools, even though one is Excel, and for a very nice presentation by staff. I would like to have you think about how you better communicate what an 18% reduction means. At your board meeting tonight, you will be reviewing the 3rd quarter work plan. And I was looking at it, trying to find out what you were doing with GIS and how it was funded. And there's no funding for GIS. Perhaps it's all buried just under subscription software. If you look at something like the Authority Atlas, you have items that haven't been started yet. You have other projects that may or may not mention GIS, and I just have no way of knowing whether those are going to be impacted by this reduction. So again, I think a revised work plan ought to accompany this budget to better illustrate what your spending means. The other thing I didn't understand is there was a comment early on about grants were only being included if they were already assured you had them or some other commitment. But early on in the document in your packet, talking about expenses exceeding revenues, they say remaining $5,892,318 in expenses will be covered by other income sources, including interest income, grants, and carryover funds. Now, you were just told about the carryover funds, but I'm a little confused about where you stand with grants. And I only mention this because last week at the Habitat Agency Public Advisory Committee, Executive Officer Sullivan told them that he had fortunately gotten a couple of awards from the Wildlife Conservation Board in February, which is really good news because in March, the state had told the board to not grant any more awards. And so one of the things I would like you to say more about, if you are going to depend on grants, is that you consider providing some sort of probability of availability of grants due to external forces such as the state budget deficit. I also, since I haven't run out of my time yet, was going to remind you that there's a kind of an interesting tool. It won't work for 9-year forecasts, but there's a tool called Balancing Act, and you can break your budget up into categories. It's really intended as a public information tool and public input tool because people can change the amounts in each of the categories, and you can constrain it so that you can't run a deficit.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. I was coming back to thank you, Doug, and I do recall you did send an email with the questions in there, so I just Want to elevate the question regarding state grants? Do you think there's going to be a problem? The state is going to be breathing eggs. Okay, I see your face.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head for those who are joining via Zoom. Thank you for the question. Just a couple points. One, as we've said, what's being presented as part of the budget are the grants that are already secured and under contract. So that's something that's separate. In terms of looking toward the future, I think, you know, Mr. Muirhead is absolutely right. We are heading into a budget cycle, especially at the state level, where there likely will not be grants. So, or they won't be as many, they'll be more competitive, you know, fewer funds available. And so we'll have to look at that carefully for our future projects. We have been very fortunate in the past, but that does come along with kind of the boom and bust cycle of budgets. Yeah. But that doesn't immediately affect anything that's in the budget here. Nothing we've heard so far would involve the state taking back a grant that has already been authorized and put under grant agreement.
So we're being cautious. Not optimistically cautious, but
Yeah.
conservatively cautious that the grant funding is probably going to be a lot less. Okay, I just want to make sure that was clarified. And then you had a question about the GIS expenses. Is that built in or is that part of the?
Okay, so then I wasn't sure if that question was for the Q3 report or for the budget,
I
but
think that is for the board.
yeah, but either way, we always do budget for GIS. It really just does depend on the types of projects that we have on the work plan for next fiscal year, as well as the software that we use for our GIS program that is included in the equipment and maintenance under the software subscription category. So our detailed breakdown, there is a line for software subscription and there is the cost of the GIS program. Now we have a GIS specialist, a GIS administrator in-house. And so we do have a line item that's mapping and GIS services. Those are for outside consultants if we were to have a special need for someone outside of our agency to kind of, perform or deliver. But we also have in-house so that they might deliver what we need. So again, depending on the year's project, whether there's budget for outside services for GIS, it varies year to year. Trying to think of other potential areas that GIS program might expenses, but usually it's those two line items.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the bulk of the questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so kind of a breakdown by type to kind of show how that 18.7 million comes out to. With salaries and benefits being a big part. But this year we also have, or this upcoming fiscal year, we also anticipate there's election costs, as well as continuing to have capital expenditures and department project expenses. Okay. So now the Urban Grant Program, kind of giving a little bit more of a detailed explanation of how it works. The amount in the proposed budget, the $100,000, that is what accounting considers the allocation amount. As part of the budget each year, the board approves the budget and the budget has that annual amount that we put into the program. And so the pool of money is set aside and we don't use it for our own projects. And we keep kind of accumulating that allocation. It usually takes about 2 to 3 years to kind of build up that piggy bank, if you will. And that is when, not quite when I hand it over, but that's when I kind of give it to the grant making program, grant program, to kind of offer a solicitation. Those are the grant cycles that we publicly put out. It's competitive grant.
It's not every year then.
It's about every 2 to 3 years. So basically, for me, accounting puts aside that money and it kind of accumulates, and then we go out for a solicitation. And that is the amount that is available for the board to award. After that, you know, again, accounting and the grants, we track and manage it. And then we reimburse the grantees as they kind of over a period of time as a project progresses. So what happens is I am tracking how much we have available for solicitations. And then once they're awarded, we're also tracking how much the grantees are drawing down. So technically, we're still holding some cash, even though it's awarded out to the grantees. We're still holding onto the cash, but we're not using it for any of our own projects, nor can we award it for another grantee. Those are meant specifically for each grant, and we kind of track and make sure that they
So by partially we are giving to the grantee.
why
So, for example, somebody has 100K, we just awarded that.
Mhm.
And not on that time, we just gave $100 right away, 100,000. right
yeah,
away.
we
just-
do not pay upfront.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
yeah.
Just as the project is progress, then we are
Yes,
just. Okay.
correct. Yeah, it's on a reimbursement basis. So what we estimate is total allocation that's available as of June 30th would be 1.2 million. Is in that urban grant piggy bank at the current moment. That would be available, you know, for solicitation. However, there are recommendations that staff would provide as well as to how much to offer up in a grant cycle. And hopefully that will help kind of explain our process.
Let me ask
Mhm.
the question. 1.2 million. That is we accumulate separately, right?
Mhm.
Whatever we awarded that, you have another place that's set, and then whenever they reimburse, you give them differently, right? That's not mixed together. You know what I'm saying?
Correct, yes. I am tracking two different columns.
Different
Yes,
columns. That's what I'm saying.
yes.
I just want to make sure we're getting close to
Mhm.
time, so are we on track to finish? Or are we're probably gonna go over?
We'll go over a little bit, but I'll just go and let everyone know.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it.
Okay. So, if the budget is approved as proposed by staff, the projected ending balances for each of the major funds as of June 30th, 2025, which is the end of the upcoming fiscal year, would be as follows. And so you would be able to see the drawdown from, and I wish I had the previous slide to compare. But I think the takeaway is that when we did the 9-year forecasts, as well as kind of considering the budget, we looked at the end carryover ending balances to kind of see where we are. Are we in a fiscally secured position? Very similar to what Director Gill was saying, like, are we fiscally strong and our balances are healthy if we were to move forward with the proposed budget. Okay. So now to compare how do we compare with the current year's approved budget? So then I'll first pass it to Elizabeth to talk about the salaries and benefits and the changes.
Good evening, directors, and I'll try to move us through quickly here. So we are looking at a kind of a net decrease of just over $375,000 in that first line item from our current budget to the proposed budget. Director Gill, to get at some of your questions, we have 63 total positions today. 13 of those are currently vacant. Between now and September,
16.3 is the total, it's a filled one, right?
no,
Total, so
planned positions,
so
yeah.
you have 50 now?
50 plus in seasonal staff, yes. But so we have 13 current vacancies and very robust recruitment plans that to fill 10 of those before the end of calendar year 2024. But we are choosing to leave 3 positions unfilled. So it's only 3 that we're leaving unfilled. The deputy clerk of the board, which is why you see individuals such as myself sitting in this seat to help Caroline along.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great job.
The senior.
I can help you guys out.
Yeah, okay, great. One,
Yeah, free of charge.
a senior open space planner position and a open space technician 2 position. We have a gauntlet of others across the departments that will be filled in these next coming months. To Lee's point, we accumulated so many vacancies because with all of the transition work we've been doing, we were trying to be very strategic about what was gonna get filled and how we were gonna accomplish things. The second element contributing to the salaries and benefits portion is our cost of living adjustment. As a reminder, we historically recommend cost of living based on the March CPI data for San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, which is looking at the year ending in February. That data provides a cost of living recommendation of 2.4% this year. We do look at the comparators of what's going on in some of our other agencies and similar agencies. East Bay Regional Parks is looking at a 3% increase this year, Mid-Penn at 3%, and Santa Clara County Parks at 4%. Those are all through collective bargaining, and many of them actually have been in response to years and years of 2% and 3%. For our COLA, we currently, looking back at the last 9 budget cycles, it averages out to 3.32%, taking this more in the moment approach. And implementing the 2.4 would bring that down a little bit to an average of 3.23%. And then the third factor in this line is our benefits. Our medical benefit plans, specifically Kaiser and Health Net, are both seeing increases effective July 1. Kaiser will be 11.9% and Health Net will have a 7% increase to the premiums. So though we are saving some staff positions, we do have the actual salaries and benefits are increasing. So those who are working here will still see an increase there. And in the interest of time, I'll turn it back to Justine unless you have really pressing questions. Great.
Thank you. Okay, so departmental operating expenses, we can also notice that we had a decrease of a little under $1 million. Main drivers include outside consultancy, but one of them being the construction costs, as we kind of wrap up some of the capital improvement projects from Mayano Yakima as well as Yagas Creek. That reduced a little under 39%. Another one was acquisitions being reduced, acquisitions budget. But across the board in some of the major expense categories, travel expenses were reduced by over 75%. Equipment and maintenance were reduced by 17.5%, and facilities and utility expenses were reduced by 33%. And then in comparison for this current fiscal year to next, it is an election year. This
November.
calendar year, but it lands in our next fiscal year. So we do have to account for it in terms of that increases our budget ask compared to this current fiscal year. But as I mentioned, in terms of the capital improvement, the capital expenses dropped with the Rancho Cañada del Oro bridge and day use area wrapping up. And so there's also a drop in the capital improvement line from 3.3 to about 2 million. And then we also are lowering our allocation for the urban grant program. But still, as you can see from the previous slide, we still have a healthy, quite large amount available that we've kind of accumulated for solicitation. And then kind of comparing again, we continue. So just to note, we continue to bring in grants to augment our revenues. For the upcoming fiscal year, total expenditures of the 18.7 is being reduced by grant funding. So in essence, we're only utilizing about 17.5 million of our agency's own funds. And that kind of goes back to one of the comments where we bring in 12 million. So then we will have to use that carryover about like 5 million, like 4.67 of our carryover to help augment kind of like the remaining 17. That's how the numbers kind of shake out at high level. And then these are the grants that we're expecting to be reimbursed directly to us because we actually have to front and pay it first. But there are also some of the projects, especially like acquisitions, we have received outside funding for acquisitions where the grantor actually directly deposits the funds into escrow and doesn't come across and doesn't show up in our budget. And that kind of goes back to Megan Dreger's 1-to-4 kind of leveraging ratio, where we continue to kind of get outside money to help and leverage our purchases, but it doesn't quite show up in our budget because we actually don't receive the money in our accounts. And then that pretty much sums up my presentation part, unless I, open up to questions. Do I? Okay, sorry. Yes, I did these slides too early. I kind of forgot what.
Okay, I think this is about the last slide, so just to wrap it up, but we've been talking about grants and external funding throughout the presentation today and how important they are. These are some logos of some of our current funders. We currently have 13 active grant agreements totaling about $24 million. Again, that discrepancy of that big number is partly because some of those are for acquisitions, and that's just, was saying those acquisition dollars don't hit our bank account, and so it doesn't reflect in the budget, but we certainly are bringing in all that money and doing all these great projects. So the number though is always changing. As certain projects we're going to expect to close out this year as they've wrapped up, but we have other grants that will be coming online as we get under grant agreements. So it's always a changing number, how much external funding we have. These current grants generally fund capital projects, as we've talked about earlier, which is acquisitions, restoration, and public access projects. One thing we have been successful with, which is a little bit harder to get, is planning money. We do have several grants toward the Coyote Valley Conservation Areas Master Plan, or CVCAM, which is an important funding source for that big effort. And then lastly, grants are an important source for our projects, a source of funding for our projects. As we've been talking about, bringing in these external funds helps us do a lot more and really meet our mission. But kind of going back to the question we had earlier, as we know, grants are not always a reliable future source of funds because of state and other government budget fluctuations. Sometimes there's a lot of money and grants are more readily available. Sometimes there's less. So we're basically always on the lookout for other funding sources, particularly steady funding streams to help us navigate those boom and bust cycles of budgets.
The last one, the Bonneville's Environmental Foundation is new to me. That's I never see before that.
Yeah, we've got a few grants from them. They funded some restoration work in Coyote Valley, a wetland cleanup or restoration and cleanup project, and some planting restoration along Fisher Creek.
That's a good achievement.
Okay, so this was an informational item only. Staff does intend to take the full budget and work plan report to the board at the public budget hearing on June 13th. As per the requirement, the whole report is available to members of the public, to the board, 30 days prior to the public hearing. And so that would be, I don't know why I did, May 13th. It's supposed to be May 13th.
Is there wrong with it on there?
I think in my head, I was thinking 30 days and I put down 30. But it's, the report will be available May 13th, 30 days posting requirement.
All right, good job.
Thank you.
A lot of questions. See, we won't ask you again.
Anything you need from us or no?
I'm sorry.
Do you need anything from us at this point?
No, unless you guys have any questions for me,
No,
I don't,
yeah.
you're good? Okay.
I already threw you guys up.
I was just gonna make, when Carolyn, you did the board bites, it might be, if it's helpful for us to, just put out that, we're producing a balanced budget and we're something strategic, Mark, is saying that we're being
Fiscally responsible.
fiscally responsible, right? Something along that line, that we're doing some really, look at the budget, something that's beneficial, we find that helpful. Just so the public is aware that, we're looking through it, you're looking through it, and then we're coming up with a very balanced budget. I want, thank you very much. And we appreciate, the patience with all the questions, but. Okay, so at that point, then I think our meeting is formally adjourned.